The summer of 2024 started like any other in Willow Creek Estates, the kind of gated neighborhood where every lawn looked airbrushed and every smile hit a spreadsheet. But by August, my life had turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from because it all began with a single postcard-perfect Saturday when I was out back grilling steaks with my 10-year-old daughter Emily while my wife Sarah watered her prized rose garden, the one she'd spent 3 years cultivating into something that belonged on magazine covers. And that's when the white HOA golf cart rolled up like a shark cutting through calm water with Karen Whitmore riding shotgun, clipboard in hand, sunglasses so big they looked like welders' masks, and before she even stepped off she was already screaming that my grass was .05 inches too tall and that Sarah's roses were an aggressive species that threatened the community aesthetic. I laughed at first because who measures grass with a ruler precision? But Karen didn't laugh. She slapped a $500 fine on my grill lid and told me I had 7 days to correct both violations or the fines would double daily. Sarah tried to reason with her, explaining that the roses were heritage antiques passed down from her grandmother, but Karen just smirked and said, "Rules are rules, Jennifer," even though my wife's name is Sarah. That was the first red flag, the deliberate misnaming, the power trip, the way she licked her lips when she wrote the citation like she was tasting victory. I paid the fine because I had just closed a major contract for my construction company and $340,000 for a custom lake house. And I didn't want drama. I told myself it was easier to pay than fight. But that was my first mistake because appeasement only feeds the beast. 2 weeks later, another citation arrived, this time for my pickup truck being commercial, even though it was my personal vehicle with no lettering, just a few ladders in the bed from work. Karen claimed it lowered property values and gave me 14 days to remove it from the neighborhood entirely or face $1,000 per day. I parked it 2 streets over at my buddy Mike's house and started reading the covenants for the first time in 8 years of living there. That's when I discovered the HOA had amended the rules 3 times since we bought the place, each amendment more draconian than the last, and every single one had been signed by Karen Whitmore as president, treasurer, and compliance officer. No elections, no minutes, just her signature in different colored inks. I brought it up at the next board meeting, a folding table in the clubhouse with 7 folding chairs, 6 of them occupied by Karen's bridge club, and when I asked to see the voting records, she told me they were lost in the flood, even though Willow Creek hadn't flooded since 1998. The room went silent, then Karen leaned forward and said in this syrupy voice, "Jason, if you don't like how we do things here, you're welcome to sell." And the way she said sell felt like a threat wrapped in silk. I left that meeting shaking with anger because I realized we weren't homeowners anymore. We were tenants on land. Karen considered hers. The next month, the citations became weaponized. First, it was my mailbox being non-compliant wood, even though every mailbox on the street was wood. Then it was Emily's chalk drawings on the sidewalk being graffiti. Then it was the American flag on my porch being too large, according to some rule written in 2023 that nobody had ever heard of. Each fine $750, status $500, $3,000. And every time I paid, because my lawyer said fighting in small claims would take longer than the fines would accrue, but every payment felt like swallowing glass because I was funding my own oppression. Sarah started having panic attacks every time the HOA golf cart cruised past. Emily stopped playing outside, and I started drinking more than I should. Then came the letter that broke me, October 31st, Halloween night. While kids were trick-or-treating, a process server in a cheap suit knocked on my door and handed me a lien notice for $47,000 in unpaid fines and legal fees with a court date for foreclosure in 90 days. Foreclosure on a house with a $180,000 mortgage that was almost paid off over fines for roses and chalk drawings. I sat on the porch steps with that paper in my hand watching Karen across the street in her witch costume handing out organic fair trade candy while smiling like she hadn't just tried to murder my family's future. Something inside me snapped. Not rage exactly. Colder, calculated, the kind of calm that comes before a storm surges. I went inside, kissed Sarah and Emily goodnight, then drove to my warehouse and started designing the fence. Not some Home Depot special, a real fence. 10-foot black aluminum spears with 10,000-volt pulsed electric wiring running through every rail, legal for livestock in our state, Perfectly legal for agricultural deterrent, as long as proper warning signs were posted every 20 feet. I ordered $28,000 worth of materials that night and paid for rush delivery. Then I spent the next 6 weeks documenting everything, every citation, every payment, every threatening email from Karen with subject lines like, "Final notice before legal action." In all caps, I installed security cameras pointing at the street, the yard, the driveway, every angle, 4K with audio, and I waited for the moment Karen would give me the justification I needed, because I knew she would. Predators always overreach, and on December 14th. At 6:03 a.m. she did. I woke up to Sarah screaming from the front yard. Karen had hired a landscaping crew to rip out Sarah's rose garden while we slept. They were already loading the uprooted bushes into a trailer. Sarah was on her knees in the dirt, crying over her grandmother's roses that were now just stumps. Karen stood on the sidewalk in her North Face vest, filming on her phone with this triumphant smirk. I walked out in my boxers and asked what the hell they were doing, and Karen said, "Removing unapproved vegetation per Covenant 17.3 subsection D," and when I told them to stop, she laughed and said, "You're in default, Jason. The association now has the right to cure violations at the owner's expense," and handed me an invoice for $12,800. That was the moment the switch flipped from defense to offense. I smiled, actually smiled, and told her, "Karen, you just made the worst mistake of your life." And she rolled her eyes and said, "See you in court, loser." Then climbed into her Tesla and drove away. What she didn't know was that my security cameras caught every second in crystal clear 4K, including her telling the crew, "Make sure you destroy the roots. I don't want these trash plants coming back." And that footage was already uploaded to a cloud drive with timestamp and GPS metadata. That night I started building the fence. The first post hole went in at 2:17 a.m., under the cover of darkness because I knew Karen had her minions patrolling the streets in their golf carts looking for violations to report. I had 6 guys from my construction crew working in shifts, all paid triple overtime and sworn to silence. We poured concrete footings 12 inches wider and deeper than code required, because this fence wasn't just going up, it was going to war. Every spear was powder-coated matte black so it disappeared against the tree line at night. Every rail carried 10,000-volt pulses hot enough to launch a grown man 6 feet, but engineered with a 1 second on 4 second off cycle so it wouldn't kill, just punish. I spent $4,800 on bright yellow warning signs that read, "Danger, $10,000 the Vi electric fence." Survivors will be prosecuted in 3-inch letters, one every 20 feet exactly as state law required. By sunrise on day 3, the back fence line was done, and I flipped the switch for the first test. The low hum felt like justice vibrating through my bones. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, white-knuckled on a coffee mug. She hadn't slept in days. She asked if I was sure about this, and I told her the only thing I was sure of was that Karen had drawn first blood, and I wasn't raising my daughter in a neighborhood where a dictator in Lululemon could destroy her mother's soul over flowers. Emily drew a picture that week of our house surrounded by a black fence with lightning bolts and a stick figure Karen flying backward through the air with X's for eyes. She titled it Daddy's Castle and taped it to the fridge. And that was the moment I knew, no matter what happened next, I had already won the only war that mattered. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she escalated like a toddler denied a toy. First came the anonymous complaints to the county that I was running an illegal zoo because someone reported hearing wild animals, which turned out to be my fence charger humming. Then came the fake 911 calls about a man with a gun on my roof, which was just me installing cameras. SWAT showed up twice, guns drawn. Both times left laughing when they saw the setup, and one deputy actually asked for my contractor card because he wanted the same system for his farm. Every incident documented, every body cam saved, because I knew this was all going to court, and I was building a fortress of evidence. Then Karen played her ace. She called an emergency HOA meeting and pushed through a new rule banning all fences over 4 feet retroactively. Every homeowner got an email saying they had 30 days to remove non-compliant fencing or face $10,000 per day fines. Half the neighborhood lost their minds. People who'd spent $20,000 on wrought iron now had to tear it down or bankrupt themselves. That's when the whispers started. Texts in a secret group chat called Willow Creek resistance, where neighbors who'd been silent for years started comparing notes. Turns out Karen had been skimming HOA dues for years, $400,000 unaccounted for. Private investigators hired by 3 different families, all reaching the same conclusion. Money funneled through a fake landscaping company owned by her sister. I offered to host the next resistance meeting at my house, and 23 people showed up, some still in shock that they weren't alone. We drank beer in my garage surrounded by the half-built fence and swapped war stories. Old Mr. Jenkins from down the block cried when he talked about how Karen foreclosed on his late wife's best friend over a $200 late fee. We voted unanimously to sue the HOA for breach of fiduciary duty, racketeering, and fraud, but we needed a trigger, something so egregious. The judge couldn't ignore it, and on January 8th, Karen handed it to us on a silver platter. She hired a crew to cut my power at the pole while I was at work, claiming I was stealing electricity for the illegal fence. The only problem was my entire house was on solar with battery backup, and the fence had its own dedicated transformer. When the power company showed up, they refused to cut the line because everything was permitted and inspected. Karen lost her mind on the sidewalk, screaming at the lineman that he was incompetent and probably bribed. The whole thing caught on my new 8K doorbell cam with audio so clear you could hear her fake eyelashes flapping. That video went viral on the neighborhood Facebook group within hours, 4,000 views in a day. Comments like, "Is this real life?" and "She's finally snapped." Support started pouring in from people I hadn't talked to in years. Someone made a GoFundMe for my legal fees that hit $15,000 in 48 hours, and that's when I knew the tide had turned. But Karen still had one card left to play, and she played it the night of January 17th when the temperature dropped to 9 degrees, and she sent her goons to tear down my fence with bolt cutters while Sarah and Emily were sleeping. Except they never made it past the gate because at 11:47 p.m. my phone exploded with motion alerts. And I watched live as Karen's nephew Tyler, drunk as a skunk, grabbed the fence with both hands and lit up like a Christmas tree. The 10,000-volt pulse threw him 10 feet into a snowbank where he lay screaming while his buddies ran. I called 911 not to help him, but to document everything, because the moment Tyler's feet left the ground, Karen's empire started to burn. Tyler lived, unfortunately for him, because the ambulance ride plus 3 days in the burn unit with second-degree electrical burns on both palms cost Karen $87,000 out of pocket, since he wasn't covered under workers' comp for criminal trespass. The police report listed attempted destruction of property and trespassing after dark, and my security footage showed Tyler and 2 others wearing black hoodies cutting through my side gate with tools marked Whitmore Landscaping. Karen tried to spin it as a misunderstanding between neighbors, but the detective wasn't buying it, especially when I showed him the text messages from Karen to Tyler that I'd subpoenaed from his phone after arrest. Messages like, "Just cut the wires, I'll pay you $500 cash, wear gloves," timestamped 9:14 p.m. the same night. That was felony. Conspiracy to commit property damage. Karen was arrested 2 days later in the Whole Foods parking lot, handcuffed in front of half the neighborhood while loading $400 worth of kombucha into her Tesla. The video went mega viral, 3.2 million views on TikTok in a week, with captions like, "HOA Karen gets the shock of her life," literally. Donations to our legal fund hit $120,000 overnight, but Karen still had friends in high places. The judge at her arraignment was married to her Pilates instructor and set bail at only $5,000. She walked out smirking in the same outfit, posted on the HOA Facebook group that she was being persecuted by a rogue homeowner with dangerous wiring, and announced a special assessment of $8,000 per household to cover legal defense against domestic terrorism. That was the final straw. 16 families filed a class action lawsuit the next morning, alleging fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and RICO violations. The HOA's insurance carrier immediately dropped coverage, claiming intentional acts. Karen was suddenly on the hook personally for hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Her house went into foreclosure inside of a month when the bank called her $1.2 million mortgage for material breach of community standards. Ironic justice, but she still wouldn't quit. She started a GoFundMe titled, "Help Me Fight HOA Abuse," and actually raised $60,000 from Karens across America who thought she was the victim. She used the money to hire the most expensive attorney in the state, a guy who'd gotten a senator off for DUI manslaughter, and he filed 17 motions to dismiss plus a $2 million defamation countersuit against me, claiming my fence had lowered her property value and caused emotional distress. The day the countersuit was served, Sarah found me in the garage staring at the fence charger with tears in my eyes. She thought I was breaking, but I wasn't. I was realizing we hadn't gone far enough, so I called my lawyer and said, "Add criminal referral to the FBI for wire fraud because Karen had been using the mail to send fake invoices for years." 3 weeks later, federal agents raided her house at 6 a.m., seized her computers, her phone, her designer handbags as evidence of unexplained wealth. The indictment dropped on Good Friday, 27 counts, including mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, bail set at $500,000. She couldn't make it, sat in county jail for 38 days in an orange jumpsuit while her lawyer screamed about constitutional rights. The trial was scheduled for October, but we weren't waiting. The civil case against the HOA went to mediation in June, and the judge, a no-nonsense former Marine, looked at our mountain of evidence and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been running this neighborhood like your personal fiefdom, and I'm about to burn it down." He ordered immediate dissolution of the current board, appointment of a receiver to run the HOA, and set a trial date for damages in September. Karen's attorney tried to settle for $250,000 and a public apology from me. I laughed in his face and said, "See you in court." Because by then I had something better than money. I had the smoking gun. During discovery, we found Karen's secret ledger, a spiral notebook hidden in her attic that listed every bribe, every extortion, every fake invoice, including $180,000 she'd forced builders to pay her under the table for approval expediting. One of those builders was my old friend Mike, who'd kept every text, every Venmo, every voice memo of Karen saying, "Pay me or your permits disappear." We had her dead to rights. The mediation judge took one look at the notebook and said, "This is organized crime wearing yoga pants," then scheduled an emergency hearing to freeze all her assets. Karen showed up to that hearing in a $4,000 St. John knit suit, looking like she was attending a gala. But when the judge read the order seizing her bank accounts, her cars, even her shoe collection, her face went the color of spoiled milk. She started screaming that I was a terrorist who electrocuted her nephew and lunged across the table at me. It took 3 bailiffs to drag her out while she kicked off one Louboutin and left it behind like some deranged Cinderella. The video hit 12 million views in 48 hours, and Yarsh Hokaren was trending worldwide. But the best part, the absolute chef's kiss, was when the receiver discovered Karen had never actually transferred the neighborhood common areas to the HOA. She'd kept them in her personal name the entire time, meaning every dues payment for 15 years had been paid to her personally, not the association, tax fraud on top of everything else. The IRS got involved, liens piled up like snowdrifts, and by August Karen was living in a 1-bedroom apartment over her sister's garage with an ankle monitor waiting for criminal trial. But she still had one last venomous gasp left in her, and she aimed it straight at my family on the night of September 3rd when someone firebombed Sarah's minivan in our driveway while we slept. The explosion woke us at 3:22 a.m., a concussive whoomph that shook the windows and turned the night orange. I ran outside in boxers to find Sarah's Odyssey fully engulfed, flames licking the sky as the gas tank brewed for a second blast. Emily was screaming from her bedroom window. Sarah stood frozen on the porch in her nightgown, clutching Mr. Fluff, the stuffed bunny Emily had. Slept with since birth, the fire department arrived in 7 minutes, but the van was already a blackened skeleton. Insurance called it total loss, $38,000 gone. But the real damage was watching my wife sob over baby pictures melted in the glove compartment. That was the line, the unforgivable line. Because whoever did this knew that Van had carried Emily home from the hospital, had every sticker from every vacation, had Sarah's grandmother's rosary hanging from the rear view. Arson investigators found the accelerant trail leading from the street and a burned scrap of paper with my address written in purple Sharpie, Karen's favorite color. Her DNA was on the cap of the marker found in the bushes. Turns out when you're on ankle monitor, they track your every step. And Karen had visited a friend 3 blocks away at 2:45 a.m. The same night, the friend rolled immediately when faced with accomplice charges and handed over ring footage of Karen filling a gas can in her garage, wearing a ridiculous blonde wig like that would fool anyone. Attempted murder charges got added to the pile, bail revoked. Karen was dragged back to jail in handcuffs, screaming, "He deserved it, he ruined my life." The criminal trial started 2 weeks later, and it was a bloodbath. The prosecutor played the firebomb video, then the fence zapping video, then 15 years of Karen's greatest hits. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months took the stand, one after another. Grown men cried, talking about how she'd threatened their children, their pets, their livelihoods. When Sarah testified about waking up to her car in flames while holding Emily's bunny, she didn't raise her voice once, just spoke in this dead calm that made the jury lean forward. And when she said, "She tried to burn my daughter's memories because could stop her from burning mine," half the courtroom was in tears, including the judge. Karen's attorney tried the poor misunderstood widow defense, pointing out her husband had died 5 years earlier, but the prosecutor countered with bank records showing Karen had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on him 3 weeks before he slipped in the shower, and the medical examiner had ruled it accidental only because Karen hosted his re-election fundraiser. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. Karen jumped up screaming, "You can't prove anything," and the judge threatened to gag her literally. On day 9, the jury took 47 minutes to return guilty on all 27 counts. Sentencing was set for December, but we still had the civil trial for damages, and that one was personal. I took the stand for 3 days straight, showed the jury the melted car seat where Emily used to sit, the charred baby blanket, the foreclosure threats, every fine, every tear. Then played the video of Karen laughing while Sarah's roses were ripped out. When I stepped down, Karen leaned over to her attorney and said loud enough for the mic to catch, "I should have burned the house with them in it." The judge immediately cleared the courtroom and held her in contempt. The jury came back with $4.2 million in compensatory damages and $10 million in punitive, total $14.2 million against Karen personally. Her face when the verdict was read is burned into my memory forever, mouth open, eyes bulging. Then she fainted dead away, hitting her head on the table on the way down. Medics had to revive her while the bailiffs stood laughing. The judge dissolved the HOA entirely, ordered new elections with oversight, and awarded every plaintiff in the class action their dues back for 15 years plus interest. Karen's assets were auctioned off to satisfy the judgment. Her house sold for $1.4 million, her Tesla for $82,000. Her shoe collection alone brought $220,000 at a special Sotheby's auction called The Wicked Witch's Wardrobe. Every penny went to the victims. She ended up with $11.47 in her inmate account and an 18-year prison sentence. But the story doesn't end there, because on the day Karen was transferred to state prison, the transport van was involved in a minor accident, and during the confusion she tried to escape, made it about 40 yards in her orange jumpsuit and shower slides before a K9 took her down by the calf. The dashcam footage is still the most requested public record in county history, yet even from prison she kept fighting, filing handwritten appeals claiming I'd hypnotized the jury with my illegal electric fence. But appeals court denied everyone in record time, calling her filings frivolous and delusional. Last I heard, she's working in the prison laundry 6 cents an hour, and her new nickname is Sparky. Meanwhile, our neighborhood is reborn. We elected Mr. Jenkins as president. Dues dropped to $200 a year. The common areas are actually maintained now. Kids play in the streets again. Sarah planted new roses, deeper roots this time. And my fence, my beautiful, glorious 10,000-volt fence, still stands exactly as built because the new HOA voted unanimously to grandfather it in as a historical monument to freedom. Every Halloween we string purple lights on it and hand out candy under a banner that reads, "Welcome to the shockingly free block." Emily, now 12, wants to be a lawyer when she grows up, says she's going to specialize in kicking Karen butt, and sometimes late at night when the charger hums its low, righteous song. I stand on the porch with Sarah's hand in mine, and we watch the sparks dance along the rails like fireflies made of pure justice, because some fences don't just keep the wolves out, sometimes they light up the sky when the wolves try to get in.